Let's go to why we are all here. I would like to introduce our special guest, Dorothy Roberts, who is a distinguished sociologist and legal scholar and public policy researcher whose work seeks to expose racial inequities that are embedded in many health and social service systems. Her work focuses on reproductive health and reproductive justice and bioethics and child welfare, and how basically, at the heart of intersectionality, how inequitable laws sort of structure uh, our rights and our health. Her work is focused on reproductive rights for Black women and children of color in the child welfare system, and so it's by its very nature intersectional. But she is a multi-named professor, as you can see here. She's the 14th Penn Integrates Knowledge Professor, the George A. Weiss, I think it's wise of these. You'll let me know, Dorothy. A university professor of law and sociology, and the Raymond Pace and Sadie Tanner Moswell Alexander Professor of Civil Rights at the University of Pennsylvania. And she directs the Penn Program on Race, Science, and Society. And she's the author of 5 books. Her internationally acclaimed book, Killing the Black Body, Race, Reproduction, and the Meaning of Liberty, Shattered Bonds, Torn Apart. And the book we're here to discuss tonight, The Mixed Marriage Project, a memoir of love, race, and family. She's also a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and in 2024 was named a MacArthur Fellow. And for those of you who don't know, that is the fellowship that's it's often referred to as the Genius Program, and it's an incredible honor. And so, with that, I am so delighted to welcome to our salon Dorothy Roberts.
Mhm. Thank you so much, Lisa, for that generous introduction and all that terrific information about all that you're doing. It's really impressive.
We're small and mighty is how we say it around here. So, I am so excited to talk to you about this book. Do you see all my little tabs? You see that? You see
Yes.
that? This book is so profoundly beautiful. It's this sort of like this beautiful mix of sort of memoir and anthropological research. And it was a book, and I'm not, Dorothy, I promise you, I'm not saying this to flatter you. It was a book that I was excited to keep returning to. I wanted like, and then what happened? And then what she find? And then what she found? And so thank you for this really beautiful book. And so for those of you who don't know, this book, and I'm going to ask Dorothy because and she can tell it far better, is based on, it's like I said, part memoir and also her discovering that her father had this sort of his whole life from the time he was like 21, this interest in interracial intimacy, and was conducting all of these interviews that sort of spanned like almost 100 years of interracial marriage. And I'm talking black, white, these are black, white heterosexual couples. One of the things that's, when my view of intersectionality is very much informed by sort of sociological work, particularly,
Yeah.
Patricia Hill Collins's
Yeah.
Black Feminist Thought was just like a
Yeah.
groundbreaking book for me. And so I come out
Me
of
too.
applied, right? I come out of applied social psychology, individual primary unit of analysis. And one of the things that was always so captivating about the sociological view is this notion that or I guess one of the things, how I saw that in practice is when I was doing my HIV prevention research with mostly Black men. And I'm doing interviews and focus groups and um, what they're telling me, their individual stories, it's sort of micro level stories, are of course reflecting these larger systems of structural inequality, right? I can't get a job because of this criminal record. I can't, all of that stuff. And so, your book also sort of really brings home how these sort of, how the structural inequality, particularly residential segregation, really
Hmm.
shapes interracial intimacy. Can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about, because a lot of that history I
Yeah.
just didn't even know
Yes.
about.
Yes. Yes. So again, the lives of these couples were completely structured by residential segregation, by having to live in the Black Belt. Uh, I had never thought about the Black Belt as having any white residents. That just never occurred to me. And most of what I've read about it describes the Black Belt as being entirely Black. But the white spouses, whether they were wives or husbands, had to live in the Black Belt with their Black partners. And that meant that they the white spouses had to leave their white communities, their families. Often their families disown them, as my father's brother did, disown him when he married my mother. They couldn't visit with their black partners if they went back to visit. Their children couldn't visit their white grandparents. Mrs. Tyler, who was from Czechoslovakia, tells about when she separated from her husband. She discovered that her husband was black, that he was having an affair with someone who lived in the neighborhood, and she uh, confronts him, and she leaves with their son. And she moves in with her sister, her white sister. Her son can't live with her, so he moves with the black grandmother. Now, she says on her birthday, she wanted her happiness to be complete, so she wanted to spend the day with her son. Brings her son to the apartment building where she lives now with her sister. And the next morning, she goes to work. Her sister calls her up. There were telephones, by the way. But anyway, well, my father didn't
Yeah,
know
but
he'd
your
have to have
father
the
still
phone
was showing
numbers.
up at people's doors a
He
lot without
showed up at
calling.
people. He showed up at people's doors because he didn't have their telephone numbers. Okay, so uh, sister calls her up. You've got to get home. There's a mob in front of our apartment building, and she gets there. A mob of people because he's like 8 years old, is in the building, and they have to escape immediately. And she goes back to living with her husband. But Mrs. Tyler is an example of a European born woman, white woman, who comes to Chicago, many of them had never met a black person before in their lives. They meet their uh, spouse, their husband, fall in love, get married, and then have to move into the Black Belt. Uh, cannot tell their employers their true address, because if their employer knew their true address, they'd figure out they were in the Black Belt and they'd be fired immediately. Because why would a white woman be living in the Black Belt unless she was sleeping with a black man? And that's cause for termination.
Mhm.
Uh, they don't even, Many of them describe how if they went out in a car,
Yeah.
the husband would drive and they'd sit in the back so everybody would think the husband was their chauffeur. Now, Mrs. Tyler eventually says, I never would have married my husband. I love him. He's the best person I know, but I never would have married him had I known how horrible it is. And this is something that contests a major sociological theory about immigration, which is the best way for an immigrant to assimilate into US culture is to marry a US citizen. They married a US citizen, but this rule does not apply if that US citizen is Black. And that was a shock to them. And many of them said it was as if, I write in the book, as if you bought a used car and it turned out to be a lemon, and you can't return it. That's how they felt, trapped in these marriages. Not all of them. There were also many of the wives, especially the ones in the Communist Party, who saw their marriages as part of a struggle against racism, especially racial segregation in Chicago. But there were also many of the white wives who felt they had been fooled and would not have gotten married had they known the hardships. Now, Another aspect of this, which is very related to intersectionality, is the experiences of Black women.
Ah, yes, I was going to ask you to talk about the
Yeah,
intersectional dynamics of the Manasa.
yes,
Good,
yes.
yes.
So then again, in that very first interview, my father asked Mrs. Alberts, have you heard of the Manasseh Society or the Manasseh Club? And they, neither she nor her husband has heard of it, but my father was looking for it because he had heard there was an interracial club in Chicago. And he eventually learns more about it because as he interviews more people, he learns more and more about this club. And he even finds a woman who goes in the bedroom and brings back these notebooks filled with the names of members and their addresses because she collected the dues and she would mark off who paid the dues for this club. But my father soon realizes that everyone he's interviewed who is a member of the club is a white woman and a Black husband. And so he starts to ask about it. Where are back then they said colored women. Where are the colored women? And one woman says, we don't have anything to do with colored women. Why not? My father asks. They have loose morals. They sleep with white men, but they don't demand that these men marry them. And this was a very common theme that many of the couples raised. Nope, there are not that many Black women married to white men, but there's a lot of white men who are sleeping with Black women. They have mistresses. They're married to white women and they have Black mistresses on the side. But they frame it as it's because of the Black women who have loose morals. Uh, Also, the idea that it's just better to be in an interracial marriage between a white woman and a Black man because white women are better at raising children. Again, this contradiction of white people hiring Black women to raise their children, right? But this idea that because Black women's morals are so loose, they shouldn't be raising their own children.
Right.
That was repeated over and over. And another thing that was repeated mostly by the white wives, but there's a little bit of this among the black wives, white husbands, and I'll mention an instance of that. But this was mostly white wives, Black husbands wanted their children to be light enough to pass as white. That came up a lot, boasting that their children were so light. Mr. Alberts, same first couple, calls one of his sons a little Dutchman. And when my father says, what do you think your son is going to be? So, well, he might become a chauffeur for the Vanderbilts. And then he might marry one of the Vanderbilt daughters. And then he jokingly says, imagine if they find out that I'm his father. I could see the headline, Vanderbilt daughter marries Black boy. But he's he's imagining a life for his son as one passing as white. Um, and many of them have this same kind of comment. Uh, One woman was just so memorable because she tells my father, it's the Manasseh children. That's what she calls. She says, I won't call them colored children. They're Manasseh children, which is mixed. It comes from the Bible, Joseph marrying an Egyptian, Jewish Joseph marrying an Egyptian woman. And their son was Manasseh. So Manasseh, they named a society after this, so-called mixed child. And so this woman is saying, oh, I don't call them colored, they're Manasseh children, but they have it worse than the full colored children. My father said, how could that possibly be? That they're worse off than colored children in Chicago? Well, because we tell them that they're not colored. And, you know, basically also implying, and other people mention this too, that they're superior to colored
Right.
children.
Right.
And then when they go outside, people tell them that they're colored. And, you know, and one woman says, we had to sit them down and explain to our children that people think they're colored. And it was a great shock, she says. You know, that's why it's so hard for them. Um, just outrageous.